What you're about to see might surprise you. Welcome to a channel where content is made to keep you interested from start to finish. Subscribe now and don't miss what's next. I noticed something had changed the moment my daughter-in-law handed me a folding chair. Not a word, not an explanation. She simply unfolded it at the far end of the dining room, away from the long oak table where everyone else had already claimed their seats, and set it beside the small side console that usually held decorative gourds and a ceramic turkey I had given her years ago. The chair wobbled slightly on the hardwood floor. She adjusted it once, then walked back to her guests without looking at me. It was Thanksgiving. My house. The house I had lived in for 31 years. The house my husband Robert and I had chosen together, repainted together, filled with the sound of our son Ryan's first steps, his first laugh, his first word, which was not mama or dada but rather light, because he had always been fascinated by the lamp in the corner of the living room. That lamp was still there. I had looked at it when I walked in and felt the particular warmth of continuity, the way certain objects hold memory simply by remaining in place. I stood for a moment in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, holding a dish of sweet potatoes I had prepared that morning. Steam rose gently from the casserole. I had used Robert's mother's recipe, the one written on a yellowed index card in handwriting I still recognized as careful and deliberate, the way old women wrote when they believed their words deserved to last. The main table seated 11 people comfortably. I counted 12 chairs arranged around it, close together, mismatched from different rooms. There was room. There had always been room. But my place, apparently, was beside the ceramic turkey on the wobbly folding chair. My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old, a retired registered nurse who spent 32 years at a hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. I have small hands, a habit of waking before sunrise, and a patience that people often confused for weakness. For a long time, I confused it for the same thing myself. I set the sweet potato dish on the counter, straightened my back, and walked to the folding chair. I sat down without comment. My son caught my eye for only a moment from across the room before his wife touched his arm and his attention shifted entirely to her. The dinner went the way Vanessa's dinners always went. Loud with the right people, pointed in its silences. She had invited her sister and her sister's husband, two of Ryan's work colleagues she was cultivating for networking purposes, and a couple from their neighborhood I had met only once before. She moved through the room like a curator, adjusting conversations, redirecting attention, positioning herself at the center of every story. The food on the main table was generous and beautifully plated. Vanessa had ordered a catered arrangement, a fact she mentioned 3 times to her guests. Rosemary-crusted turkey, a cranberry reduction, roasted vegetables glistening with something expensive. My sweet potato casserole was placed at the very end of the table, reachable from the main seats, but clearly an afterthought, a dish no one introduced or mentioned. When Ryan's colleague James reached past it for the cranberry sauce, he did not notice it at all. I ate slowly, listening to conversations I was not included in. The new vacation home Vanessa and Ryan were considering in Colorado, the renovation they wanted to do on the master bathroom, Ryan's potential promotion, which Vanessa described with an ownership that made it sound like her own achievement. Between bites, I calculated quietly the way I had always calculated, the way numbers had always been my honest companions when people were not. Down payment on their house in Southlake. $94,000 offered 6 years ago when the market was rising faster than their savings. Monthly contributions to Vanessa's car note the first 2 years because, she had explained, the payments conflicted with their lifestyle budget. Ryan's failed business venture in 2019 which I absorbed quietly to the tune of $61,000. Lily's no, Sophie's private school tuition, $3,200 per semester, which I had covered since third grade because Vanessa had decided public school was not aligned with their values. I did not resent the money. Robert had left me well provided for, and I had managed my own career carefully for decades. I resented that no one at that table remembered any of it. Not the numbers, not the sacrifice behind the numbers, not the woman sitting on a folding chair beside a ceramic turkey while steam rose from a casserole no one touched. Near the end of dinner, Vanessa clinked her glass lightly for attention. She wanted to announce that she and Ryan had decided to begin the process of purchasing the Colorado property in the spring. Everyone applauded. Ryan beamed with the uncomplicated happiness of a man whose ambitions never outpaced his comfort because something else had always quietly closed that gap. I looked at my son across the room. He was laughing, easy and bright. He did not look at me. After dinner, I helped clear plates the way I always did, quietly and without being asked, because it was my house and old habits are their own kind of dignity. Vanessa accepted my help without acknowledgement. At one point she moved past me in the kitchen and said, without stopping, that we would need to talk about the Colorado down payment timeline soon. Not a question. Not a request. A scheduling note. I rinsed a plate and set it carefully in the rack. "Drive safe, Margaret," she said when the evening ended. She never called me Mom. The drive home through Fort Worth's late November streets was quiet. My old Buick had a heater that worked better than it had any right to at its age, and I drove slowly, letting the familiar roads hold me. When I finally pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I sat for a long moment in the dark. I am a woman who spent 32 years holding other people's lives in her hands. I have held the hands of the dying and felt the weight of the living, people who could not afford to fall apart, people who depended on my steadiness the way a ship depends on ballast. I was never praised for it. Steadiness rarely is, but I had always known the difference between giving willingly and being taken from without noticing. Tonight, for the first time, I noticed. I went inside, brewed chamomile, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the silence Robert used to fill. In the back room, I kept a small filing cabinet with 3 drawers. The bottom drawer held personal records, letters, a few photographs. The middle drawer held medical documents and insurance. The top drawer held what I privately called the ledger, though it was not a formal document, just a series of yellow legal pads where I had recorded, over the years, every significant contribution I had made to Ryan and Vanessa's life. Dates, amounts, descriptions, not out of resentment, but out of the nursing habit of documentation, of believing that what happens deserves to be recorded honestly. I pulled the top drawer open and set the most recent legal pad on the table beside my tea. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago. I had transferred $4,000 to cover the overage on Vanessa's credit card, the one attached to my account, the one she had been added to 11 years ago for emergencies and had never once used only for emergencies. Below that entry, I had clipped a printed email I had found in my shared family inbox by accident. It was a forwarded message from Ryan to a financial advisor, asking about the process for adding his name to my investment accounts as a co-owner, noting that his mother was getting older and that it would be sensible to have access in place before anything happened. I had not been asked. I had not been told. I had not signed anything, and I never would. I closed the legal pad gently. I had spent years believing that love required a kind of self-erasure, that the measure of a mother was how little space she took up in the life she helped build. I had held that belief the way I held patients' hands in the hospital, firmly, without flinching, even when it hurt, But sitting at that table in the Thanksgiving silence with chamomile cooling in my cup, I understood something I had been approaching for a long time. A folding chair beside a ceramic turkey was not an accident. It was a reflection, and I did not recognize the woman it was reflecting back at me. I went to bed before midnight and slept 4 hours, which was more than I expected. By 5 in the morning I was dressed. The sky over Fort Worth was still dark and cold, the kind of November morning that smells like rain that has not arrived yet. I drove to my bank branch, the one on Camp Bowie Boulevard where I had banked for 19 years. I arrived 15 minutes before opening and sat in the parking lot watching the lights come on inside, one by one. When the doors opened, a young man named Derek greeted me by name. I had been one of those customers who memorized staff, who asked about children and remembered answers. He offered coffee, and I accepted it, and asked to speak with Patricia Osei, the branch manager, whom I had known for 6 years. Patricia was in her office within 3 minutes, which told me she had been there since before opening. Good people often are. "Margaret," she said, taking my coat. "This is an early visit. Everything all right?" I set my ledger on her desk and folded my hands over it. "I need to make several changes today, Patricia. Permanent changes." She sat down across from me, and her expression shifted to the focused attention of someone who had seen this kind of quiet resolve before in women who had waited a very long time before arriving. I walked her through everything. The joint credit card, the automatic transfers, the recurring payments tied to Ryan's accounts, the contribution I sent monthly toward the South Lake mortgage, the emergency fund I had created for them after the business failure, to which I had been making small, regular deposits ever since, on the assumption that they might need it again someday. She pulled each account up carefully, confirming details with me before touching anything. When she reached the credit card, her expression shifted. "Margaret," she said carefully, "there were 3 charges on this card in the last 48 hours. A hotel booking in Colorado, a furniture deposit, and a winery reservation. Total is just over $7,000. I breathed in slowly. Colorado. She hadn't waited. Before announcing it to her guests, before the applause, before the drive home, Vanessa had already begun spending. "Freeze it all," I said. "Everything tied to their names. Today." Patricia's fingers moved with the calm efficiency of someone who took seriously the weight of what she was doing. Each click of her keyboard felt like a door closing gently but permanently. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "Done. All automatic payments suspended, the credit card frozen, and the shared emergency account has been separated and returned to sole ownership." Patricia paused. "There is one more thing I want you to see." She turned the monitor toward me. "Someone attempted to access your investment portfolio through the online portal on Monday evening. They used your date of birth and your address as security answers, but failed the second verification step. Monday, 2 days ago. The right answers. Just not the right security question." My chest settled into a stillness that was not calm, but was something harder than calm. "Add a new security layer," I said. "Change the verification questions to things only I would know." Patricia nodded once and kept typing. When the last confirmation printed and she slid it across the desk to me, I held it for a moment before folding it into my coat pocket. 23 years of automatic giving, suspended before 9 in the morning on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Outside, the sky had lightened to a pale gray pink, the color of early winter mornings in North Texas. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. The radio came on softly, a station playing something instrumental and unhurried. I was not happy. Happiness was not what this was. It was something else, cleaner and more structural, the feeling of a woman who has finally stopped bleeding without knowing she was wounded. I drove home and had just begun making oatmeal when my phone started moving across the counter on its own, vibrating with a frequency that told me more than any message could. I turned the burner to low and watched it. Ryan first. "Mom, something is wrong with my card." Then, 60 seconds later, in capital letters, "Mom, call me right now." Then Vanessa, whose texts arrived differently, not panicked but commanding, as if the correct response to a stopped payment was to issue louder instructions. "The card is not working. Fix this immediately." Then another. "I am calling the bank. This is unacceptable." Then, "We have commitments that depend on these accounts functioning. This is irresponsible." I stirred my oatmeal. I had spent 32 years in a profession that did not allow irresponsibility. I had memorized medications and dosages, and the specific sounds different kinds of pain make in human breathing. I had held the standard. I ate my breakfast at the kitchen table with the phone face down on the counter and the winter light coming through the window at a low, honest angle. By 11, Ryan's calls had escalated to 6 in an hour. I let them go to voicemail. His messages shifted from demanding to something closer to genuinely frightened, which told me the hotel reservation had been canceled, the furniture deposit had been flagged, and the mortgage auto payment had failed to post that morning. Vanessa left no voicemails. She sent texts, each one shorter and more pressurized than the last, until they stopped entirely, which meant she had shifted strategies. At 1 o'clock, I heard a car in the driveway. I moved to the front window without pulling the curtain. Ryan's black SUV sat at the curb, engine still running. Vanessa stepped out first, which was unusual. She was typically the last one out of any car, preferring the moment of arrival to be arranged on her terms. But today she was already at the walkway before Ryan had closed his door, moving with the sharp, purposeful stride of someone who had decided the fastest path to resolution was force. Ryan followed, phone to his ear, his face a particular shade of flushed that I recognized from when he was a teenager and had done something he could not undo. They knocked, then knocked again, harder. "Margaret, I know you're home. This is ridiculous. Open the door." She never knocked like a guest. She knocked like a creditor. I watched them through the narrow gap in the curtain. Ryan had lowered his phone and was talking to her in a low, urgent tone. She cut him off twice. He gestured toward the door. She folded her arms and stared at it as if determination alone could open it. They stood on my porch for 8 minutes before Ryan called my cell again. I watched him dial and listened to the silence of my phone, still face down on the counter. Eventually, Vanessa walked back to the SUV and got in. Ryan stayed a moment longer on the porch, his hands at his sides, his head slightly bowed. He looked, from a distance, like a man who had just realized he was standing outside a door that used to be open to him simply because he was loved, and that love and access are not the same thing. He walked back to the car. The engine started. They left. I went to the kitchen and turned the burner back on. The next morning, I was dressed again before 7. Victor Aldridge had been Robert's attorney before he became mine, and his office on Magnolia Avenue had the particular quality of places that take their work seriously: good wood, quiet lighting, the kind of silence that means nobody is rushing. His assistant showed me in without my needing to explain who I was. Victor rose from behind his desk and shook my hand with both of his. "Margaret, it has been a while. Sit down. How are you holding up?" I placed the ledger on his desk the same way I had placed it at Patricia's. "I need to revise my will, Victor, and I want to establish a trust." He settled back in his chair with the attentiveness of a man who has learned not to interrupt women who speak slowly on purpose. I told him about Ryan. Not the anger, not the folding chair, but the facts, the documented facts from the legal pads, the 23 years of contributions, the attempted account access, The Colorado bookings charged before the announcement, the email to the financial advisor about co-ownership. Victor listened without expression until I finished. Then he adjusted his glasses and said something I did not expect. "Margaret, 6 months ago, Ryan contacted this office asking about the process for establishing a durable power of attorney for you." The room held still around me. "He said he was concerned about your capacity for long-term financial decision-making as you aged." He framed it as a precaution. My capacity. I had spent 32 years making life and death decisions in a hospital. I managed 3 rental properties and my own investment portfolio. I had never once been confused about a number, a document, or a consequence. "He did not file anything," Victor continued, "but the inquiry was detailed. And I want you to know that I redirected him, and I made a note. I assumed you knew. Clearly you did not." "No," I said quietly. "I did not." We sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Let's begin." Victor worked with the focused precision that good attorneys share with good nurses, nothing wasted, nothing skipped, each document treated as if its exact wording mattered, because it did. We went through every asset: the house, the investment accounts, the rental properties in Arlington, the pension, the savings. "I want everything in a trust," I told him, "managed by an independent trustee. Out of reach." "And the beneficiary?" I had been thinking about this since the night of the folding chair, not with anger, but with the clarity that comes from finally seeing a situation as it actually is, rather than as you hoped it would be. "My granddaughter Sophie," I said. "She is 14. The trust releases at 25. Until then, funds may be used only for her education and basic welfare, at the trustee's discretion. No parental access, no third-party claims." Victor wrote without comment. "And Ryan?" he asked without looking up. $1, I said. "So, he cannot contest the will." Victor stopped writing for a moment, then he continued. When we reached the final page, he set his pen down and looked at me directly. "This is a significant and irrevocable set of decisions, Margaret. I want to make sure you've had the space to consider everything." "I have had 68 years, I said, "and I have never been clearer." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded and turned back to the documents. When I walked out of Victor's building onto Magnolia Avenue, the afternoon sun was low and direct, cutting between buildings at the angle that Fort Worth does in late November, hard and golden and without apology. I stood on the sidewalk and let it rest on my face for a moment. I had entered that office as a woman who had been systematically diminished for years by people who relied on her not noticing. I left as a woman who had arranged for that to never happen again. The drive home was different from the drive home after Thanksgiving. That drive had been heavy with the particular grief of seeing something clearly for the first time. This drive was lighter, not happy, not triumphant, just free, the way a room feels after you have finally cleared out everything that never belonged there. I was standing at the stove heating soup when I heard a soft knock at the front door. Not Vanessa's knock, not Ryan's, quieter, more tentative. I dried my hands and opened the door. Sophie was standing on the porch alone, her backpack still on her shoulders, her dark hair in a braid she had done herself, slightly uneven, the way she liked it. She was looking at me with an expression I recognized from years of nursing, the face of someone who has something difficult to say and has been working up the courage to say it the entire way here. She was 14, and she had walked 6 blocks from the bus stop. "Grandma," she said, "can I come in?" "Always," I said, and stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with my chamomile, the night everything changed, and accepted the glass of water I gave her. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "I heard them talking last night." Dad and Mom. I don't think they knew I was in the hall. I sat across from her and waited. Mom was saying that if you kept refusing, they would look into having you declared mentally unfit. She said with Dad's power of attorney they would have control of everything, including the house, and that it would be easier than fighting you directly. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked up at me. Her eyes were serious and sad in the way that children's eyes become serious and sad when they have been exposed too early to the mechanics of adult selfishness. "I wanted you to know," she said. "I thought you should know. Thank you for telling me," I said. That took courage. She shook her head slightly. "It's just the truth." "Yes," I said, "it is." We sat together for a while. I reheated my soup and made her a grilled cheese because she had not eaten since lunch, and she never complained about being hungry, which was something Robert had done too, that same quiet endurance. I watched her eat and felt something settle in my chest, not grief exactly, but the specific tenderness of loving someone young who has already figured out what honesty costs. Before she left, she paused at the door with her backpack on. "Grandma," she said, "are you going to be okay?" I looked at her for a moment. The question she was really asking was whether the people who were supposed to love me had broken something irreparable. The answer was complicated in the way that all honest answers about family are complicated. "I am going to be better than okay," I said. "And you are going to be loved every day of your life. That I can promise you." She hugged me quickly and walked down the steps into the evening. I stood in the doorway until she turned the corner, then went back inside. Ryan came alone 3 nights later. It was after 9. I was reading in the front room when I heard his car pull up, and unlike every other arrival that week, this one was slow. No engine cut abruptly. No car door slammed. He parked and sat for several minutes before I heard the door open and close with a quietness that did not match any version of Ryan I had seen in years. His knock was soft, almost hesitant. I opened the door. He looked like he had not slept properly in several days. His shirt was wrinkled in a way Vanessa would never have allowed on any ordinary evening, which told me he had dressed without her. He was not holding his phone. His hands were at his sides, which I had not seen in years. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" "Just us." I moved aside. He walked into the living room slowly, as if the familiar furniture was something he needed to relearn. When he sat on the couch, he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and for a moment he simply looked at the floor. Then he said, "I don't know when I became someone who would do this to you." He said it not to me specifically, but to the space between us, the way people speak when they are trying to be honest with themselves out loud for the first time. I sat in the chair across from him and let the room hold the silence. He continued, "Vanessa and I had a long fight last night. She wanted me to call an attorney about the capacity thing, and I sat there listening to her and I kept thinking, this is my mother. This is the woman who drove me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning when I was 17 because I thought it was embarrassing to call an ambulance. This is the woman who did not sleep for 4 days when I was sick and called it a privilege to be there." He stopped. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a person," he said. "I think I started seeing you as a resource a long time ago, and I dressed it up as family because it was easier, and Vanessa encouraged that. I let her. I kept letting her." He looked up then. His eyes were the same eyes as the boy who had run to me in thunderstorms, who had called his first spoken word light because he was fascinated by the lamp in the corner. They were older now, and tired, and full of something that had no name except maybe recognition, the particular grief of seeing yourself clearly and not enjoying what you see. I said quietly, "The folding chair, Ryan." He closed his eyes. "I know. I sat on a folding chair at my own table on Thanksgiving, and I carried a dish I made from your grandmother's recipe that no one touched. And your wife told me we would need to discuss the Colorado down payment timeline before I even reached my car. I know, Mom. I was there. I watched it happen. Then you know that this is not about the bank accounts. He nodded slowly. This is about 20 years of being loved like a function instead of a person, I said. This is about a woman who gave everything she had and was handed a folding chair. The room was very quiet. He did not argue. He did not explain. He did not reframe it in a way that redistributed blame. He simply sat with it, which was perhaps the most meaningful thing he could have done. After a while, he said, I want to change. I don't know if you believe that. I don't know if I've earned the right to ask you to believe it, but I'm going to try whether you're watching or not. I looked at him for a long time. Love is not an account you can overdraw indefinitely, I said, and forgiveness is not the same as returning to what was. He nodded. I know, I'm not asking for what was. I just needed you to know that I see it. That Lily Sophie, I'm sorry Sophie coming to you was right, that she told you the truth even when it cost her. She's 14, and she has more integrity than I've had in years. He stood slowly, straightening his jacket. I'll go. I just needed you to know. He moved toward the door and paused with his hand on the frame. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember how to show it. He walked out into the cold night air. I sat in the chair for a long time after his headlights disappeared down the street. I did not call him back. I did not make promises I was not ready to keep. I simply sat with the truth that he had finally said out loud and let it settle in the room like dust after a long wind. Dawn came the way it always does in Texas in late November. Not gentle, not apologetic, simply present and cold, and completely indifferent to everything that happened the night before. I was awake before it arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with tea, listening to the neighborhood gather itself into another day. My phone was quiet on the table. No commands, no urgency, no one else's emergency wearing my name. I had a message from Sophie, sent at 7:15. Good morning, Grandma. I just wanted to say I love you. Also, I think the sunrise this morning looked like your curtains. I looked at the curtains. Pale gold and cream, the colors Robert had chosen because he said they made the kitchen feel like morning all day. He had been right about that. I wrote back, I love you too, sweetheart. More than you will ever know. A little later, another message came. From Ryan. Just wanted to say good morning. No agenda. Nothing needed. I hope you slept. I set the phone down and looked out at the yard where the grass was still silver with frost. People do not change in a single night. I know this. 32 years of nursing taught me that recovery is not an event. It is a process. Often slow, often setback-ridden, never guaranteed. Ryan had a long road ahead of him, a road that would require him to dismantle habits and assumptions, and a marriage that had been built, in part, on my quiet disappearance. I could not walk that road for him. I had learned, finally, that I could not walk anyone's road but my own. I stood, brought my cup to the sink, and pulled on my coat. The morning was clear and sharp. I walked down my street slowly, the way I used to walk with Robert on his good days near the end, when the neighborhood was enough of a world, and the cold was honest, and the light was honest, and everything that mattered could be held in a single breath. I had spent 68 years learning to take up less space, less noise, less need, less inconvenience. I had folded myself into corners so others could stand in the center and call it home. I was done folding, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the clear and unshakable knowledge that the woman I had been when Robert chose me, the woman with opinions and presence, and a quiet authority that came from knowing her own value, was still here. She had simply been waiting, patiently, the way good things wait, for permission to return. I did not need permission anymore. At the corner I paused and let the morning air move through me. My will was signed. My accounts were protected. My granddaughter was loved and provided for in ways that no one could dismantle. And somewhere down the street my son was learning, slowly and incompletely, and with great difficulty, what it meant to be accountable to someone other than his own comfort. That was enough. Not everything, not perfection, but enough to walk forward on. I turned and headed home, my steps steady and unhurried on the frost-silver sidewalk, the morning rising around me as if it had been arranged specifically for this, for a woman of 68, reclaiming the simplest and most radical thing she had given away, her own life. At home, I poured a second cup of tea, sat at the table by the window with Robert's morning light falling across the wood, and felt, for the first time in longer than I could name, entirely and undeniably like myself. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Has someone in your life ever made you feel like the folding chair at your own table? And what did you finally do about it? Tell me in the comments. And let me know what city you are listening from. I read every single one.